Hey, gorgeous Facebook land. It's been a little hot minute since I've done a live on here. I can feel my heart racing around what I'm about to speak into. It feels enlivening for me. My heart's beating almost as if it wants to beat out of my chest. If you're jumping on and you're watching this, I'd love for you to join in on the conversation. If you're watching the replay, I'd love for you to share anything that comes through for you. So, I want to talk today about vulnerability. And what I want to say around this is let's stop the glorification of vulnerability. So, what I've noticed is that there almost has been this uprising and this glorification of vulnerability. And I don't feel like it's actually serving anymore. In fact, I know that the intention behind it was to bring us more into our bodies, more into ourselves. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that it's not necessary. But what I'm saying is we have gotten to a point where it's almost like it is glorified to be in our mess. It's glorified for us not to have our shit together. It's glorified for us to feel, swampy and drowning in our emotions and to feel not okay and it it really feels disempowering. Really feels disempowering. And I want to speak into my perspective on this and what I've come to witness and realize uh, within my own journey and also within the clients that I've worked with and I guess the area that I've worked in as well. So I've made some notes so I get everything that I want to say here. And firstly, I want to say that yes, we did get to a point where we completely shut down from our bodies, from feeling anything at all. So I feel like there are a couple of different stages of vulnerability um, where I feel it's gone overboard because we can always have too much of something, always have too much of something. And I actually feel like it's keeping us in this place that isn't true. It's not the truth of who we are. It's not the truth of how we are intended to be. We are glorious human beings. We are alive. We are in this world to experience aliveness, to experience the richness and the joy and the humility of all that life has to offer us. Not just the vulnerability of our hurt and our pain and our, it just feels really incredibly disempowering. So I feel like the first stage of where we've gone is the acknowledgement of, oh, I feel shame, I feel guilt. And I participated in this as well. So I'm not denying that at all. So there's an awareness and acknowledgement of, yes, we get to feel those feelings. And beneath that is actually the true piece of vulnerability. I actually believe, and what I've witnessed and experienced for myself is beneath that arises is our true vulnerability, is what would it actually feel like to live an, an amazing, incredible, alive, joy-filled, everything that we deeply yearn for and desire, a life filled with that, a life that is that potent and that powerful. Because that's what I believe we're all yearning for, and that's what I've come to witness is actually our deepest vulnerability. That's what we're actually more terrified of. And so this glorification of vulnerability, it's resulted in us drowning in emotion. It's almost like we've put vulnerability on a pedestal. And when we put something on a pedestal and when we focus on something, it only creates more of it. So we get into our vulnerability from this place of, oh, I feel like this, and I feel really tender, and I feel really like, hug me, support me, and be with me. Yes. And when we are constantly functioning from that point, from that place, if we're not taking full responsibility for our own feelings and allowing ourselves to fully feel the emotions inside of ourselves completely and entirely, we're actually outsourcing still. We're outsourcing to the other person to A, hold space for us, to B, save us, essentially, right? It's almost like we're asking the other person to make it okay for us to be in our victim and our hurt. And I'm not saying that this isn't beneficial at all, but what I'm saying is there is a different energetics of being in the space of, I'm really suffering right now. I've got all this stuff happening. I'm holding so much at the moment. I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and life feels really hard, or I feel ashamed, or I feel guilty, and having the other person sit there and go, yeah, I totally get it. It's okay. Like, it's all good. And just sit in that, when actually the truth is that if we were to take responsibility in that space, it would mean the vulnerability of asking for what we want, of actually saying, yeah, I feel all of this, and can you please hear me and see me? And I need this. I choose this because I know that I can. And I know that this is actually available for me. So what can come from that space is actually an addiction. It's still an addiction to the emotions, an addiction to the state of feeling suffering. So it's still an addiction, right? In the same way that we would be addicted to alcohol or drugs, it's an addiction to the emotion. It's an addiction to being in the swampiness and the vulnerability of what's there. And the way that I see it is, say you've got a well. So to give you a visual image, say you've got a well, and I want to speak into how this can also differ, right? Say you've got a well, and it's almost like we've dropped into the well and we've sunk to the bottom, and we're having, of course we're afraid, and we're crying about being in the bottom. I get it. Yes. And then what's going to happen? How are you getting yourself out of there? It's almost like we've gotten stuck in this well, and we're having this pity party in this well, and expecting other people to come down into the bottom of the well with us and have a pity party with us. And we've found this pleasure in addiction. So for me, ultimately, it comes to truth love and humility and pleasure. So we've found a pleasure in the addiction of swamping ourselves in the pain and the suffering, when actually what we truly desire is the pleasure of our power, our joy, our true power. And true power, there was kind of there was a space, and I'll speak from my perspective as well. There was a place where I reached where I thought my power was actually speaking into my vulnerability. Yes, and that was actually shaky foundations. Hey, beautiful woman, because my power wasn't in my vulnerability. That's not power at all. That's not true power at all. True power is when I'm just having a beautiful deer wander outside my house. True power is when we can actually then take responsibility for where we're at and go, hang on a second. Okay, yes, I'm going to fully feel, be in the humility. So rather than vulnerability, how about we adopt humility? Be in the humility of where I'm at right now. And what humility does is it's touches into vulnerability, but I guess humility for me, the difference is that it's a humbling into the heart. It's a humbling into the feeling that we're actually feeling, fully letting ourselves feel that. And as we let that move from our body, we then can take action on pulling ourselves out of the well, on knowing what it is that we need, on choosing the actions that we need to choose in order to actually get us out of that place. Because the truth is, that's our true power, is the feeling coupled with the humility of how vulnerable it actually feels to continue to move forward from that place. So what this couples into, that I've witnessed, is actually a facade. And what I mean by this is that by consistently being in the drowning, and by the way, if we're having something that consistently comes up, like a topic that, or a pattern that comes around all the time, then something's trying to shackle itself away from us. Or we're not letting ourselves fully feel the emotion that's actually wanting to be felt, which usually below the swampiness of, things are really hard and I'm drowning and all this, is actually, once we feel that below, is usually this feeling of, oh, I had expectations, or I had, this is the place, this is the facade that I was functioning from. This is the, the there's a deeper underlying emotion of truth that is so much more powerful below that, that should we choose it, will propel us into an opening that is enlivening, connective. And it comes from our heart. It's our heart actually opening. So the facade that's actually trying to shackle away, and what I see, I'm going to give you an example of this. So from my perspective, so I'll give you examples of me. What came up for me is the facade that I was actually using was the facade of vulnerability, the facade of I'm powerful in my vulnerability. I'm powerful when I acknowledge to the world that I can show my heart and I can share my emotions. I'm powerful when I can share this with friends. But actually, what I was doing is I was manipulating. I was using tears as manipulating, as trying to manipulate the situation. Right? So when the waterworks would turn on, because I was feeling my emotions, that then would mean that my friend would have to feel sorry for me or would have to pander into my disempowering state that I was choosing to live in myself. It's so wild. It's so wild, this ride. Wild in the sense of how much I believed myself to be that. So I was still believing myself to be a disempowered woman, a disempowered human being. And I was using my tears as manipulation or my vulnerability as manipulation to manipulate the situation for it to go my way, or for me to not actually take responsibility for my part in the outcome, my part in the friendship, my part in the relationship. And this is just one example, right? That happens is the result of becoming addicted to our vulnerability is consistently having to share our emotions, consistently having tears, not asking for help, not asking for support, like feeling like we need to hold everything together and then being vulnerable about how we've, essentially had to hold so much together. Why do we do that? Or you're actually not taking responsibility for yourself in another area of your life. So you're actually completely disregarding an emotion that's sitting in your body that you're unwilling to feel. And all this comes down to our willingness to fully let ourselves embrace and feel our emotions. Because sometimes what we believe is the truth of what we're feeling is actually not the truth. It's a smokescreen that our habitual patterns in our body create as a facade to continue playing out in our life to keep us from actually being in the truth of who we are, the truth of our soul, the truth of our heart opening even further, even more in love, even more in love, even more in the humility of what would it be like if I actually admitted that I was out of integrity, that I actually just completely lied to myself and you in this situation? What would it actually be to own and humble ourselves to feeling in that moment, yes, we did this, feel it, and then, oh, okay, cool. Because what I've witnessed on the flip side, and this is where it starts to go from vulnerability to humility, when we're playing in our vulnerability, we're actually in a disempowered state, a really big disempowered state when we're addicted to our vulnerability. We're actually really just recycling addiction. We're recycling disempowered state, and that's actually what we're sending out to the world. So we're sending to our clients, we're sending to our family members, we're sending to our friends that you don't have the resources within yourself to empower yourself, to get yourself out of this. And there's a lot to this. But essentially, we're still playing into the facade of our protective mechanisms. And humility moves us from the swampiness. Hey, gorgeous humans, moves us from this swampiness of drowning in a vulnerability hangover or drowning in tears, vulnerability, shame, guilt, moves us from drowning in this to actually having to bring in the truth. And this is true leadership within ourselves. And this is the truth of life. This is true energetics when we can go, hang on a second, how do I hold myself here? And how do I lead myself out of this? This is how I'm going to move out of the situation. And yes, that might be having a conversation with a friend, but not getting stuck there. What I notice is we get stuck here and we don't bring ourselves back to the truth of ourselves. So humility is the invitation to be in the revealing of what's actually happening. What is actually happening here? What is it that we actually are being invited into? What is the truth of what we deeply desire? Because a lot of the times when we can let ourselves feel the truth of the emotion below the smoke screen of the facade, by the way, the facade will be something that generally shows up repetitively. And the truth of the emotion that's desiring to be felt is below that. And when we can feel that, then we can let ourselves feel that. And what that actually opens up is this pocket of, I want to say this pocket of perfection. It's empowering. It's enlivening. It's exciting. And what I actually witness is our muscle to build. It's a building of this muscle to feel this. Because we've allowed ourselves to feel pain, but the true pleasure that we deeply desire, our greatness, that's the muscle that we're building. What would it feel like to feel truly joyful, to let yourself feel truly alive, and to be in the tenderness and the breathtaking experience of that, because they are one and the same. But it's almost like we've gotten swamped in the vulnerability and forgotten about where we're headed. We've forgotten about what we actually desire, deeply desire. And so what I now invite you into is, what is it that you actually truly deeply desire on your heart to be in? How do you let yourself be in the absolute euphoric joy and bliss of what your soul and your heart wants to express in this world? And if you don't know that, then maybe there's some questions that you can sit with and be with. What is the truest expression of your soul and your heart in this world? And move towards that. And as you move towards that, what will naturally arise rather than going into it is any little pieces of stuckness of emotion that we've kept along the way. And these are generally habit patterns. These are generally facades that we're trying to uphold. They're generally ways in which we've been told we should live our life that actually is incongruent and out of alignment with the truth of what we're actually here for. Because the truth is that we get to be in our joy. We get to be in the aliveness that wants to move through our body. We get to feel pleasurable, joyful, happy, fulfilled, whatever word you want to place on it, whatever word you resonate with. Give yourself the permission to have that, to feel that, to be in the bliss, to bathe and marinate in that. Because that is what we actually can feel a little bit nervous around, but that we're actually yearning for. So I've got some questions that I want to leave you all with. And if you've watched the replay, then I would love for you to share any parts around what lands for you. Before I go into the questions, I just want to say, the more you be in the truth of yourself and speak from that place, be in integrity with that, let yourself feel that, then that's actually what you give other people permission to do. That's what you give other people permission to do. It's not your words, it's how you be. It's the energetics of what you hold. How do you be so solidly in your truth? Feel anything that arises from you being in that, and know that that actually will lead you to where you're deeply desiring to go. And expressing humility, displaying humility along the pathway to your greatest, most loving, truthful self is all that's needed. That's what's going to make you come alive. So the questions that I have for you are, when you're in these situations, what is the truth of what you feel? Not the recycled story that wants to move through you, but the truth of the deepest part of your heart. And sometimes this can be found through speaking. So just completely expressing what it is that is happening. Sometimes we need the expression to come out of our minds and to find the undercurrent of what's true. And sometimes we can actually just access it by being with it. So what's the truth of what you feel? What's below the habitual response that comes up? Second question, how do you let yourself feel the fullness of this? How do you let yourself amplify this feeling and feel it fully? Hey, Ash. And then what do you need? What do you need in this situation? Hey, gorgeous woman. To pull yourself out, to save yourself. You are your own leader. You are all of the things. And then if the truth was your heart in this moment opening to your greatest power, to your greatness, to your most powerful and perfect self, to the truth of what your heart and your soul actually knows, what would that be? And how do you let yourself actually feel that? acknowledge that. Allow yourself to be in that. Because that's what's actually truly here. So my invitation is, let's go from swampy, vulnerable victim place into actually enlivening ourselves. Like, I want to see, I want the other side. Let's have the full spectrum, not just half. We're missing half of the person if we're not displaying our resourcefulness to actually also lead ourselves out, to also allow ourselves the greatness and the joy and the aliveness and the vulnerability, the humility in that. That's a full-bodied human. That's what we're capable of. That's filling out our greatness. And yes, sure, emotions will come up along the way, but the more we let ourselves choose that, the more we can actually exercise our ability to feel whatever comes up along the way. And it's not yeah, that's all I have to say. Let's stop with the swampiness and let's actually be in the empowered space of vulnerability, of humility, of transparency, of honesty, of integrity, of aliveness, of joy, of pleasure, of full-bodied living. Because that's what we came here for. Yeah. It's all of it. And I feel really called, just before I jump off, just to say that this is not disregarding this, but this is actually going from this into this. How do we shoot for this and be with this as it comes up along the way, rather than shooting for this being vulnerability and this being our greatness and our power and our fullness and the aliveness that we want to be living? Because we're completely shutting ourselves off, still creating separation when we only swamp in this. I laugh because I get it. It was something that I mastered greatly, the addiction to my suffering. Yeah. All right. If you've watched the replay, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I'd love to hear your perspective. And yeah, let me know what lands for you. I would love, love, love this to be a conversation. All right, gorgeous humans, have an incredible day. And I love you all.